The vibrant, almost riotous palette of myriad colors and the ceaseless, cheerful, sometimes truly overwhelming symphony of sounds from the annual Harmony Creek Estates Fairground celebration suffused the warm, languid afternoon air. This lively, eagerly anticipated spectacle stood in stark, almost physically painful contrast to the insidious, constricting knot of profound anxiety that was steadily, inexorably tightening its grip within Mark's chest. His beloved 14-year-old daughter, Lily, sat with her characteristic quiet, uncomplaining composure beside him in her specialized, technologically advanced power mobility chair. Her bright, remarkably intelligent eyes were keenly taking in the dizzying, exhilarating, swirling amusement rides and the bustling, brightly illuminated, enticing game booths with a captivating, endearing mixture of genuine, unfeigned excitement and a subtle, almost imperceptible, poignant hint of profound wistfulness. Lily had been born with a rare, cruelly progressive, and debilitating neuromuscular disorder that severely, tragically limited her physical mobility. This unavoidable medical reality made her sophisticated electric conveyance not just a mere everyday convenience, but her very legs, her tangible, precious freedom, her primary, indispensable means of actively, meaningfully engaging with the wide, beckoning world beyond the familiar confines of their comfortable home. Navigating the densely crowded, sometimes frustratingly chaotic festival grounds was, by absolute necessity, a slow, highly deliberate, and occasionally deeply frustrating, patience-testing process. Lily, however, consistently handled the numerous inherent challenges with a remarkable, inspiring, and uncomplaining grace that always, without fail, filled Mark with an overwhelming, almost unbearable sense of profound paternal pride. Her small, surprisingly capable hand expertly, almost intuitively, and with delicate precision, maneuvered the sensitive, responsive joystick that controlled her essential chair. Mark walked patiently, watchfully, and protectively alongside her, a constant, vigilant, reassuring presence in her life, his concerned gaze ceaselessly, almost obsessively, vigilantly scanning their immediate, ever-changing surroundings. He was, on this particular sun-drenched afternoon, especially acutely and uncomfortably aware of one specific, notable individual circulating with proprietary self-importance among the many happy revelers. Deirdre Albright. Deirdre was the universally acknowledged, self-appointed, and widely disliked enforcer of Harmony Creek's extensive, often bewilderingly complex, homeowners association regulations. She was a woman whose notoriously officious, relentlessly overbearing nature and her unwavering, almost fanatical, unshakable belief in her own intrinsic, unquestionable superiority had deservedly earned her the infamous, widely whispered, and, in Mark's private opinion, richly deserved moniker Dolores the Dictator among the less charitable, more outspoken, and frequently exasperated residents of their sprawling enclave. Deirdre, a woman of rather imposing, formidable physical stature and perpetually disapprovingly pursed lips that seemed permanently set in a mood of distaste, appeared to view the numerous HOA guidelines not as mere sensible community standards designed for harmonious cohabitation, but as divine, immutable, sacrosanct law, and herself, naturally, as its sole, divinely appointed, infallible interpreter and unquestionable, unwavering executor. Her frequent, invariably unwelcome, and often intrusive interactions with her unfortunate neighbors were consistently, predictably characterized by a veritable barrage of unsolicited, condescending, and often ill-informed advice. This was usually accompanied by a relentless, unending stream of nitpicking, utterly trivial criticisms, and a general, pervasive, almost tangible air of palpable disapproval that she seemed to radiate around her like a noxious, suffocating cloud. Mark had, unfortunately, and much to his chagrin, already had several distinctly unpleasant, highly memorable, and deeply frustrating encounters with her in the past. These mostly concerned utterly minor, wholly insignificant, and frankly ridiculous alleged infractions such as the precise regulation-mandated placement of his household trash cans on official collection day, or the exact, officially sanctioned, and meticulously measured length of the grass on his front lawn. Adding another unwelcome layer of potential, simmering friction to their otherwise pleasant day out was Mr. Benson. Benson was a relatively newer resident in the settlement whose son, Tom, a somewhat boisterous and occasionally thoughtless boy, was in Lily's grade at the local school. Benson himself was a man with a perpetually aggrieved, sour air and a notoriously short, volatile temper. There had been a minor, yet telling, incident a few weeks prior at a neighborhood barbecue. Tom had, perhaps carelessly, or perhaps with a touch of youthful bravado, bumped rather hard into Lily's mobility aid, causing her to spill her drink down her dress. Benson, instead of prompting an immediate, appropriate apology from his son for his clumsiness, had astonishingly, and quite unreasonably, begun to loudly, aggressively complain about the dangerous, excessive size of Lily's essential chair. He'd claimed it was an unacceptable obstruction in crowded social settings and a potential hazard to other children. Mark had calmly, but firmly, defended Lily and the necessity of her conveyance. The unpleasant encounter, however, had left a distinctly sour taste in everyone's mouth and had firmly marked Benson in Mark's mind as someone to be particularly wary of, an individual prone to irrational outbursts. He'd seen Benson eyeing them from across the crowded Carnival Green earlier that afternoon, his expression unreadable, inscrutable, but certainly not friendly or conciliatory. Mark also recalled seeing Benson tinkering with some exposed wiring near the Ferris wheel earlier, muttering about a shoddy setup. It made Mark briefly wonder about Benson's technical skills, or lack thereof. Earlier in the afternoon, even before the subtle undercurrent with Benson had made itself felt, Deirdre had, true to her predictable, unpleasant form, approached them near the popular, noisy dunk tank, her cold, assessing eyes narrowed critically as she surveyed Lily's state-of-the-art, expensive wheelchair. That device, she'd said, her tone managing to imbue the innocuous, neutral word with a distinct sense of deep, personal offense, clearly implying that the chair was some sort of monstrous, inappropriate, and unwelcome vehicle in such a public setting, is rather cumbersome for such a public event, isn't it? Are you quite certain you and your daughter need such a large, imposing, and frankly obtrusive contraption in a crowded public space like this gala? It takes up so much room. Mark had, with truly admirable, almost saintly restraint, politely but firmly, and for what felt like the 100th time, explained Lily's complex medical condition and her absolute, non-negotiable reliance on her specialized conveyance for any semblance of mobility. Deirdre, however, had simply dismissively huffed and then abruptly moved on, muttering something clearly, deliberately audible about a distinct, regrettable lack of common consideration for others and the pressing, urgent need for everyone in this association to make reasonable, sensible adjustments for the greater good. Mark had also noticed Mrs. Vega, the head of Fairground Security, in a brief, hushed exchange with an HOA board member near the main ticket booth earlier. He'd seen an unmarked envelope pass between them and overheard the words Special Maintenance Fund Contingency. It struck him as odd at the time, a detail filed away without conscious thought. But now, with Deirdre's presence, a vague unease stirred. Mrs. Vega was generally efficient, but some found her a bit too eager to please the HOA board, occasionally at the expense of ordinary residents, Now, as the afternoon sun began its slow, majestic, almost reluctant dip towards the distant, hazy, tree-lined horizon, casting long, dancing, playfully evocative shadows across the sprawling, vibrant fairground grounds, Lily expressed a keen, heartfelt desire to get closer to the picturesque, man-made lake situated at the far edge of the park. A small, colorful, inviting flotilla of rented paddle boats bobbed gently, peacefully, invitingly on the placid, sun-dappled, shimmering water. Mark carefully, attentively, and with considerable skill, steered Lily's precious mobility chair down the gently sloping, smoothly paved asphalt path that led directly, without obstruction, to the wide, concrete boat ramp. The immediate area around the lake was, thankfully, relatively quiet, almost serene. It offered a welcome, peaceful, and much-needed respite from the boisterous, almost frenetic, overwhelming energy of the main carnival thoroughfares and attractions. Lily, wanting a closer, unobstructed view of some charmingly comical ducks waddling contentedly near the water's edge, momentarily parked her chair a few feet back from the ramp's actual edge. With Mark's gentle, supportive assistance, she then carefully, slowly transferred her weight to a nearby, sturdy park bench. Her empty, expensive chair, its brakes firmly engaged, sat innocently where she'd left it, a silent testament to her needs. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared, seemingly materializing out of nowhere from behind a large oak tree, startling Mark badly. He turned quickly, his heart lurching unpleasantly in his chest, to see the unwelcome, imposing figure of Deirdre Albright standing there. Her face was set in a strange, deeply unsettling, almost manic, triumphant grin that disturbingly did not reach her cold, calculating eyes. Before Mark could fully process her unexpected, unwelcome appearance, or manage to utter a single, coherent word of greeting or inquiry, Deirdre spoke, her voice tight, strained, and laced with an undercurrent of something Mark couldn't quite identify, but that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle, always pushing the limits. "Aren't you, Mark?" Deirdre snapped, her voice sharp. Mark frowned, confused and wary. "Deirdre, what limits are you referring to?" "Special treatment." "This whole community bends over backwards for her," Deirdre spat, her gaze flicking with contempt towards the empty mobility aid. "Lily has a right to enjoy this public amusement, just like anyone else," Mark countered, his own anger rising. "This has nothing to do with you." "Oh, it has everything to do with me, with all of us who pay for these indulgences." Sear, then, with a shocking, almost unbelievable, explosive burst of entirely misdirected, furious strength, Deirdre Albright placed her hands firmly, purposefully, on the backrest of Lily's now unoccupied, vulnerable wheelchair. She began to push the expensive, vital, life-altering piece of medical equipment with a fierce, determined, almost savage force down the smooth, steeply sloping boat ramp, directly towards the murky, unwelcoming, waiting expanse of the lake water. "Let's see how well it swims. Shall we?" "Like the rest of them have to," Deirdre cackled, her voice unnervingly high-pitched, thin and reedy, laced with a disturbing, almost demonic, triumphant cruelty that chilled Mark to the very marrow of his bones. Mark's blood ran cold, a visceral jolt of pure, unadulterated, adrenaline-fueled horror surging violently through his entire being. He lunged forward desperately, instinctively, shouting Lily's name in a strangled cry, but he was agonizingly, catastrophically, heartbreakingly too late. The heavy, expensive mobility chair, its wheels spinning uselessly, rolled unimpeded, gathering speed, down the steep, slippery, algae-slicked incline. It plunged heavily into the cool, unwelcoming, surprisingly deep water of the lake with a loud, sickening, resonant splash. It bobbed precariously, almost mockingly, on the surface for a brief, agonizing, heart-stopping moment, then quickly, inexorably, and with a final, gurgling sigh, began to sink rapidly, dismally beneath the rippling, utterly indifferent surface of the dark water. Lily gasped, a small, wounded, almost silent sound, her eyes wide, luminous with a devastating mixture of profound, utter shock, complete disbelief, and dawning, terrible, soul-crushing confusion. "What in God's name are you doing?" Mark roared, his voice raw, shaking, almost unrecognizable, filled with a raging maelstrom of utter, profound disbelief and rapidly escalating, uncontrollable, righteous fury. He felt a primal, overwhelming urge to protect his child, to retaliate against this monstrous act, but Lily's visible, silent distress, her trembling form on the bench, somehow anchored him, kept him from physically confronting Deirdre. Deirdre turned slowly, deliberately, almost languidly to face him, her eyes gleaming with a disturbing, almost unholy, perverse triumph. "Just teaching you a valuable, long overdue lesson, Mark," she said, her voice now strangely, unnervingly calm, almost chillingly conversational, devoid of its earlier shrillness. "These endless, tiresome accommodations, they're utterly, ridiculously excessive. You see, everyone in this association, in this entire town, should be treated exactly, precisely the same, no special privileges, no exceptions, ever, unseen by the increasingly, visibly unhinged Deirdre Albright, Mark's older, wiser brother, James, a highly respected, recently retired, and widely admired federal judge, had been quietly, intently observing the entire shocking, almost unbelievable scene unfold from his vantage point on a nearby, secluded, shaded park bench. James, a man of quiet, inherent, unimpeachable authority and razor-sharp, formidable intellect, had been witnessing Deirdre Albright's escalating, deeply troubling pattern of overt harassment and petty vindictiveness directed towards his brother and his beloved, vulnerable niece, with a growing, profound sense of deep unease and mounting, serious professional concern for several long, frustrating months. He now rose slowly, powerfully, deliberately to his full, imposing height, his usually benevolent, kind face now a cold, hard, impenetrable mask of controlled, formidable, judicial fury. "Fairground security, get down to the marina patrol." Now James's powerful, resonant, authoritative voice boomed unexpectedly, commandingly across the suddenly hushed, eerily quiet lakeside area. It cut cleanly, decisively, like a surgeon's scalpel, through Deirdre's unsettling, inappropriate, and increasingly hysterical laughter. Several uniformed festival security personnel, already alerted by the loud, unmistakable splash and Mark's furious, anguished shouts, quickly, efficiently, and with evident concern, approached the rapidly deteriorating scene. "Detain this woman immediately," James commanded, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument, no possibility of misinterpretation. "She is just deliberately, maliciously, and in full view, pushed a disabled child's essential, expensive mobility device into the lake. I am an eyewitness to this entire outrageous event." Deirdre's triumphant, grotesquely smug expression faltered, then completely, utterly crumbled, collapsing like a house of cards. It was replaced by a look of indignant, sputtering, theatrical surprise and dawning, belated, palpable fear, as she recognized the formidable James. "I did no such thing. It was a complete, unfortunate accident. The brakes on that thing, they must have failed. It simply rolled away on its own," she protested vehemently, her voice suddenly shrill, defensive, and entirely, transparently unconvincing. The security officers, instantly recognizing the unmistakable, ingrained tone of inherent, unquestionable authority in the retired judge's commanding voice. James was, after all, a very well-known and highly respected figure in the wider settlement and beyond. And observing Mark's visible, palpable distress and Lily's shocked silence, followed his precise instructions without a moment's hesitation or question. They firmly, professionally, and efficiently escorted a now loudly, belligerently, and incoherently protesting Deirdre Albright to a nearby designated temporary holding area, well away from the escalating, emotionally charged lakeside drama. Meanwhile, Mark, without a single second thought for his own clothes, his phone in his pocket, or the cold, murky, uninviting water, had waded with grim, desperate determination into the lake. The unexpectedly chilling water quickly, unpleasantly soaked him to the bone, making his teeth chatter. He tried desperately, frantically, to locate Lily's submerged wheelchair with his feet, shuffling through the thick, clinging silt and unseen debris on the lake bed. But it had already, distressingly, sunk completely out of sight in the surprisingly deep, weed-choked water near the far, unseen end of the boat ramp. He emerged, shivering uncontrollably and deeply frustrated, from the unwelcoming, murky water, dripping, disheartened, and defeated. His profound, overwhelming concern for Lily's vital, incredibly expensive, and now potentially irretrievably ruined piece of equipment grew exponentially, almost unbearably, with each passing, agonizing, precious moment. This particular chair was custom fitted, her lifeline, her freedom. James, his face a grim, unyielding, implacable mask of profound judicial displeasure, made a curt, urgent, authoritative call on his cell phone. Within what seemed like mere, impossibly short minutes, a specialized, highly trained dive team, fortuitously on standby for a planned lake cleaning and debris removal initiative scheduled for the following week, arrived with impressive speed at the scene. The previously festive, carefree, joyous carnival atmosphere that had permeated the air around the lake only a short while before had now completely, utterly, and irrevocably dissipated. It was replaced by a tense, almost breathless, palpable silence as everyone present, concerned neighbors, shocked fairground workers, curious, wide-eyed onlookers, and now the assembled emergency personnel watched intently, anxiously, as the divers, clad in sleek, black wetsuits and carrying powerful underwater lights, disappeared with a series of quiet splashes beneath the dark, rippling, inscrutable surface of the now ominous-looking lake. After what felt like an unbearable, agonizingly stretched-out eternity, but was in objective, clock-measured reality, probably closer to 20 long, tense minutes. The divers finally, thankfully, resurfaced. They were successfully, if laboriously, towing Lily's heavy, sodden, waterlogged mobility aid behind them, as they carefully, painstakingly, and with considerable effort, hauled the dripping, mud-caked conveyance onto the muddy, trampled shore. A collective, audible, shocked gasp went up from the anxious, watching crowd of onlookers. The primary, immediate reason for their shared shock and dismay was instantly, horrifyingly, sickeningly apparent to everyone who looked. The primary, essential brake cables on the expensive, sophisticated, custom-built wheelchair had been cleanly, deliberately, and unmistakably severed. They were not merely frayed from wear or accidentally broken by the impact with the water, but cut through with a sharp, powerful instrument, the metal ends gleaming unnaturally in the fading afternoon light. This wasn't some unfortunate, random, tragic accident. It was a clear, undeniable, and deeply, chillingly malicious act of premeditated, calculated sabotage. James's eyes, already cold and hard, narrowed further into dangerous, almost invisible slits. He approached the lead security officer for the gala, Mrs. Vega, who had arrived shortly after the initial commotion and was now conferring quietly with her team. Mrs. Vega, as Mark recalled, was known for her outward efficiency, but also for a certain bureaucratic inflexibility and a perceived deference to HOA directives. Mrs. Vega, James said, his voice deliberately low, controlled, and resonant with unspoken authority. I trust there are fully operational security cameras covering this entire boat ramp area. This has now escalated into a very serious criminal matter, as I'm sure you appreciate. Mrs. Vega looked distinctly uncomfortable, her gaze shifting nervously. Judge Harris, Mr. Harris, regrettably, and most unfortunately, the primary camera covering this specific sector, Camera 4, seems to have been temporarily offline for urgent, unscheduled maintenance for the past hour or so. A most regrettable, unfortunate coincidence. I must say, I've already logged a formal report with our on-site technician regarding the malfunction. Bien, Mark stared at her, a new, cold suspicion dawning rapidly. Offline for maintenance, right at this precise, critical moment. It seemed far too convenient, too coincidental to be readily believed. Mr. Benson, he suddenly, vividly recalled, had been lingering with a seemingly casual air near the main security office trailer earlier in the afternoon, not far from where the camera feeds were monitored. Could he have somehow... No, that was surely too far-fetched, too conspiratorial. Or was it Benson had also been seen by several people near the area where Lily's chair had been parked while she and Mark were getting snacks, shortly before they moved to the lake? Had he tampered with the wires then? The thought was sickening. James, however, merely nodded curtly, almost dismissively, at Mrs. Vega, his expression entirely unreadable, his thoughts carefully concealed. Indeed, most unfortunate, as you say. Regardless of the camera situation, I want this woman, Deirdre Albright, formerly held by the city police, who I assume are now en route. I will be filing formal, serious criminal charges myself through the district attorney's office at the earliest possible opportunity, and I will also ensure that my brother, Mark, has the very best legal representation available to pursue all appropriate and available civil remedies against Miss Albright as well. The following days and subsequent weeks were a bewildering, emotionally draining, and exhausting blur of intensive, often frustrating police investigations. There were countless witness interviews to conduct, forensic evidence to process, and complex, frequently frustrating, and time-consuming legal proceedings to navigate. Mark, with James's unwavering, invaluable, and deeply reassuring support and his profound, encyclopedic legal expertise, guiding him meticulously every single step of the way, pursued the complicated case against Deirdre Albright with a relentless, single-minded, almost obsessive determination. This was fueled by an overwhelming paternal love for Lily and a deep, righteous, simmering anger at the injustice and cruelty she had suffered. The circumstantial evidence against Deirdre, while initially significantly hampered by the unfortunately offline security camera, was still, in totality, quite substantial and compelling. Multiple credible, unrelated eyewitnesses had clearly, unequivocally seen her physically push the wheelchair towards the lake. The cleanly severed brake cables, however, added a deeply disturbing, chilling layer of undeniable premeditation that significantly complicated the initial, simpler narrative of a purely impulsive, if malicious, act of momentary anger. Who, precisely, had cut those cables? And, crucially, when had they done it? Could Deirdre herself have done it earlier in the day, unseen, perhaps while Mark and Lily were distracted? Or, more troublingly, was someone else, another party, somehow involved in this escalating, ugly affair? The initial, detailed police report noted that the type of clean, precise cut found on the tough, reinforced cables suggested the use of a specific, powerful type of tool, perhaps heavy-duty, industrial-grade wire cutters, or even more specialized, hardened steel cable shears. Deirdre Albright, when her apartment was subsequently searched under the authority of a legally obtained warrant, was not found to be in possession of any such incriminating tool. This notable absence introduced a flicker of doubt, a potential, if small, loophole for her defense. Mr. Benson, when questioned again by detectives, now with more pointed inquiries, had a frustratingly weak, almost transparently fabricated alibi for the crucial time window when the cables might have been cut prior to the chair being pushed into the lake. He vaguely claimed he was just wandering around the fairground, looking at the exhibits. He vehemently, almost too aggressively, denied any involvement whatsoever in the incident, but his previously expressed open animosity towards Lily's mobility device and his general short temper were duly, carefully noted by the investigators. He had also been seen, by at least 2 witnesses, lingering suspiciously near the security camera junction box earlier that day, claiming he was looking for a lost earring for his wife. It was all circumstantial, but it added to a growing unease. The grand jury indictment, when it was finally, after much deliberation, handed down, listed several serious, significant felony charges against Deirdre Albright. These included reckless endangerment of a disabled minor, as pushing the chair into the lake created a clear and present hazard, even if Lily wasn't physically in it at that precise moment, and it unequivocally showed extreme, callous disregard for her safety and well-being, and felony destruction of essential, expensive, custom-fitted mobility equipment. These were extremely serious felonies, each carrying the potential for very significant, life-altering penalties, including the real possibility of substantial, lengthy prison time. The normally quiet, tight-knit community of Harmony Creek Estates, already deeply, profoundly weary of Deirdre's long, oppressive, tyrannical reign and her arbitrary, often nonsensical enforcement of petty, insignificant rules, rallied vociferously, almost unanimously, and with considerable passion behind Mark and Lily. Their collective, vocal, and widespread outrage, combined with their numerous shared, corroborating stories of Deirdre's past transgressions, bullying tactics, and general unpleasantness, added considerable moral weight, if not direct, conclusive legal force, to the determined, meticulously prepared prosecution's case. Deirdre Albright, predictably arrogant, defiantly self-righteous, and entirely unrepentant to the very end of the protracted, tense pretrial hearings, steadfastly, stubbornly maintained her complete innocence of all charges. She skillfully, if entirely unconvincingly to most observers, attempted to portray herself as a tragically misunderstood, unfairly maligned, and persecuted guardian of cherished, traditional community standards and values. She painted herself as a lonely victim of a vicious, orchestrated vendetta, supposedly concocted by those jealous or resentful individuals who supposedly envied her principled, unwavering stand on maintaining order, decorum, and adherence to the rules within their enclave. However, her carefully, almost theatrically constructed, and increasingly fragile facade of injured, noble innocence began to visibly, irrevocably crumble under the combined, relentless weight of the numerous, consistent eyewitness testimonies and the ever-growing, damning number of her long-suffering, exasperated neighbors who now, feeling empowered and safe to do so, came forward willingly, even eagerly, to detail her extensive, documented history of past bullying, harassment, and general vindictiveness. The trial itself, when it finally commenced after several delays, was a tense, highly emotional, and closely, almost obsessively watched public affair, drawing considerable media attention from local and even regional news outlets. Lily, displaying a remarkable courage, poise, and composure far beyond her tender 14 years, testified clearly, calmly, and articulately about her absolute, complete dependence on her specialized, custom-fitted wheelchair for any semblance of a normal life. She spoke with quiet dignity about the profound, visceral fear and the overwhelming, crushing sense of helplessness she had experienced as she watched her lifeline, her very freedom, her connection to the world, sink inexorably into the dark, cold, unforgiving waters of the lake. Mark's voice, usually so strong, steady, and reassuring, broke audibly with raw, palpable emotion as he described, with heartbreaking sincerity, the sickening, brutal violation of his beloved daughter's trust and innocence, and the potential, terrifying, life-threatening danger that Deirdre's reckless, malicious, and inexplicable actions had so clearly, wantonly posed that fateful afternoon. The defense attorney, facing an uphill battle, tried to muddy the waters. He aggressively attempted to suggest that perhaps Mr. Benson, given his documented previous altercation with Mark and Lily and his known short temper, had a stronger, more plausible motive to damage the expensive chair. He posited that Deirdre, in a moment of poor judgment, had merely, impulsively, pushed an already sabotaged, perhaps dangerously free-rolling device, without any true malicious intent to cause significant harm. It was a thin, speculative argument, relying heavily on casting aspersions and creating confusion, but it did manage to plant a tiny, lingering seed of doubt in the minds of some observers, particularly concerning the premeditation aspect of the severed cables. The prosecution then called Mr. Benson to the stand. He was visibly nervous, sweated profusely under the calm, methodical cross-examination, and his alibi for the period when the cables were likely cut remained vague and unconvincing. He denied cutting any cables or tampering with the chair, but admitted to his previous anger and to being near the security camera box. Just curious, he claimed. For a tense period, it seemed the defense strategy might be gaining traction. The courtroom buzzed with speculation that Benson was, in fact, the hidden culprit, or at least a co-conspirator. Then, dramatically, came the prosecution's carefully prepared, devastating surprise. A highly qualified, experienced forensic analyst testified with cool, scientific precision that specific, microscopic metal fragments found deeply embedded in the cleanly cut ends of the heavy-duty brake cables were forensically consistent with a particular, identifiable brand of specialized, hardened steel cable cutters known for their unique cutting edge. And then, the true bombshell, delivered with quiet, dramatic impact, a recently processed, subpoenaed credit card statement from a secondary, almost forgotten, and rarely used HOA discretionary expense account, an account to which Deirdre Albright, it was revealed, had sole, unrestricted signatory access for emergency neighborhood maintenance supplies and unforeseen contingencies, showed a significant, unexplained cash withdrawal made just 2 days before the carnival. This was immediately followed, on the very same day, by a specific, itemized charge at a distant, out-of-town, obscure hardware superstore for exactly one single item, a pair of expensive, professional-grade, Titan grip, high-leverage cable cutters. The very same brand whose unique, proprietary metal alloy composition precisely, irrefutably matched the microscopic fragments found on Lily's damaged conveyance. Furthermore, and even more damningly, faint, but forensically identifiable, latent fingerprints matching Deirdre Albright had been successfully lifted by crime scene technicians from the original product packaging of an identical pair of cutters, which had been found discarded, perhaps carelessly, in a public trash receptacle conveniently located near that same out-of-town hardware store. This crucial discovery had been made by diligent, persistent investigators meticulously, painstakingly following the complex financial paper trail. The courtroom collectively gasped. Deirdre Albright's already pale face went ashen, a ghastly shade of gray. Her attorney looked utterly stunned, his jaw slack, his carefully prepared defense strategy instantly in ruins. This was the irrefutable, undeniable link. This was the concrete, physical evidence of clear, cold premeditation that tied the sabotage of the brake cables directly, unequivocally, and solely to Deirdre Albright. The unfortunately offline security camera now seemed far less like a simple, random coincidence and much more like a potential, if clumsily executed, part of a more elaborate, premeditated, and malicious plan. The jury, after receiving their lengthy, complex instructions from the presiding judge, deliberated for a surprisingly, almost shockingly short period of time, less than a full day. They then returned to the packed, silent courtroom with a unanimous, resounding guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, a woman widely known for her profound compassion, but also for her stern, unwavering adherence to the letter and spirit of the law, was visibly, deeply moved by Lily's quiet, dignified, and heartbreaking testimony. She was also, quite clearly, palpably appalled by Deirdre's calculated, cold-blooded, and remorseless callousness. She delivered a sentence that sent a clear, unequivocal, and powerful message throughout the entire settlement and far beyond such despicable, cruel acts of wanton cruelty, such blatant, arrogant disregard for the safety, dignity, and well-being of the vulnerable members of society would not, under any circumstances, ever be tolerated or excused. Deirdre Albright was sentenced to a significant, substantial term of several years in state prison. Her self-proclaimed, oppressive reign of terror over the unfortunate, long-suffering residents of Harmony Creek Estates finally, blessedly, and irrevocably at an end. In addition to the hefty, well-deserved criminal penalties, James, acting tirelessly and pro bono on Mark and Lily's behalf, immediately, aggressively pursued vigorous, comprehensive civil action against the now convicted, incarcerated Deirdre Albright. The subsequent, complex lawsuit sought substantial, punitive monetary damages. These were intended to cover not only the full replacement cost of Lily's highly specialized, incredibly expensive custom wheelchair, but also to provide significant, meaningful compensation for the profound, lasting emotional distress and undeniable psychological trauma caused by Deirdre's outrageous, unforgivable, malicious actions. The financial settlement eventually reached after Deirdre's surprisingly considerable personal assets were meticulously assessed and partially liquidated by the court, was substantial, far exceeding their initial expectations. It was more than enough to purchase Lily a brand new, absolutely state-of-the-art, fully waterproof, all-terrain mobility chair, a true marvel of modern engineering and design. This new conveyance would, they hoped, allow her to explore the world with a newfound, unshakable freedom, a restored sense of security, and a renewed, hard-won, and well-deserved confidence. The community of Harmony Creek Estates, as a unified, collective entity, breathed a profound, audible, almost palpable sigh of widespread, collective relief. The long, dark, oppressive shadow of Dolores the dictator had finally, definitively, and joyously lifted from their daily lives. The annual fairground, though initially horribly and unforgivably marred by Deirdre's hateful, vicious, destructive act, ultimately, and rather unexpectedly, became an unlikely but potent, enduring symbol of the neighborhood's inherent, underlying resilience, their remarkable, heartwarming capacity for genuine compassion, and their unwavering, steadfast, and deeply moving support for young Lily and her devoted, loving family. But the intricate, deeply unsettling story had one final, stunning, and deeply disturbing twist still to reveal, a testament to the hidden complexities of human motivation and deception. Weeks after Deirdre Albright's widely publicized sentencing and incarceration, a routine internal audit of the Harmony Creek Estate's HOA finances, an audit ironically prompted by the shocking revelations about Deirdre's misuse of the secondary emergency expense account, uncovered a series of unusual, small, regular, and initially untraceable cash payments. These had been made systematically to Mrs. Vega, the seemingly efficient head of Carnival Security, over the preceding several months. The payments originated from yet another obscure, previously unknown HOA discretionary fund, one ostensibly earmarked for community beautification projects. When confronted by astute, persistent investigators armed with this new, damning financial evidence, Mrs. Vega, her carefully maintained professional composure completely crumbling under the pressure, tearfully, shamefully confessed Deirdre Albright had been systematically, insidiously bribing her for months. The bribes were to overlook certain minor, but politically sensitive, HOA infractions committed by Deirdre's key allies and supporters within the association. More damningly, and directly relevant to Lily's case, the payments were also to ensure that specific, strategically located security cameras, including, crucially, the one covering the boat ramp area, would be temporarily offline for urgent, unforeseen, and unavoidable maintenance during certain critical, pre-arranged periods, such as the very afternoon of the festival. Deirdre, it seemed, had wanted a clandestine insurance policy, a way to commit her malicious act with a significantly reduced chance of direct, irrefutable visual recording, though her own breathtaking arrogance had ultimately led her to believe she wouldn't be caught even if she was filmed. Mrs. Vega, her reputation in tatters, now faced serious criminal charges of her own, including obstruction of justice and accepting bribes. The already shocking incident served as an even starker, more chilling, and deeply sobering reminder. It showed that even in the most seemingly peaceful, idyllic, and ordinary suburban settings, the insidious, often hidden challenges of dealing with difficult, manipulative, and morally bankrupt neighbors could escalate to unimaginable, terrifying, and devastating levels. But it also powerfully underscored that justice, however delayed, convoluted, or circuitous its ultimate path might be, could, in the end, painstakingly, and with great effort, prevail. Lily, with her magnificent new, incredibly sturdy, truly go-anywhere conveyance, became an even brighter, more inspiring symbol of unwavering hope, indomitable courage, and resilient, unconquerable human spirit within her enclave. She rolled confidently, joyfully through the streets and parks of Harmony Creek Estates with a spirit undimmed, a vibrant, living, and inspiring testament to the enduring, unconditional strength of family, the profound, comforting solidarity of true, caring community, and the ultimate, inevitable, and deeply satisfying triumph of good in the often difficult, challenging face of unwarranted, deeply damaging, and incomprehensible human cruelty. In quiet corners, whispers of malice may weave their dark design, but truth, like light, eventually finds every hidden line,